Please welcome Dan Kenary, CEO and founder of Harpoon Brewery.
Good morning. Thank you, Mike. In many ways, March 7, 2014 was a typical festival day at our brewery here in Boston. Tents were up, beer lines were being cleaned. We were getting ready to welcome thousands of our friends to celebrate St. Patrick's Day with us later that evening. There was just one small difference. 8 of us were also gathering that morning in our IPA conference room to decide if our company would stay independent or join the growing list of craft brewers to sell out, or to take the money and run, as they say. There were 2 options on the table that morning, and 6 of the 8 in the room had to vote to make the decision. Oh, and I was not one of the 6 with the vote. Despite the tension that day, despite the uncertainty of what the decision would mean for the future of the company, I felt at peace. Looking back now, I realize that it was because I knew with certainty the direction we should take, and more importantly, why we should do so. But first, a brief history of what led to that day. How does a boy from Worcester, raised by 2 teetotaling parents, end up in the vanguard of the American craft beer revolution? Well, the short answer is friends, luck, and hard work, but sadly for you this morning, you're not getting the short answer. In the fall of 1985, I found myself back in Boston after 3 years in Chicago, where, as Mike said, I worked for a large bank and earned my MBA during the evenings. I was still working for the First National Bank of Chicago, but in their Boston regional office, and one thing I knew about for certain was that my career in banking had to come to an end. I couldn't hack it, Mike. I wanted to keep drinking beer. I had graduated from college in 1982, mightily armed for the workforce with a degree in American history. When I got back to Boston, I reconnected with an old college pal who was in his 2nd year of business school and working on an independent research project on the new microbrewing movement that was just then gaining traction in the Pacific Northwest. This got us talking about beer. You see, I had always really liked beer. After college, I spent the summer backpacking around Western Europe and had come back complaining that all the great variety and choice that existed over there was strangely absent here. Here it was light yellow lagers from coast to coast, a veritable sea of non-choice. You had the nationals, of course, Bud, Miller, and Coors, but even the still existing regionals like Narragansett, Stroh, Old Style, and Olympia were also light yellow lagers. There were no local breweries. The only breweries were big factories, some were out on the interstate and industrial parks. It was a bleak, boring landscape as, unfortunately, beer had become a commodity. Contrast that scene with what existed at the time in Europe, where beer was alive. Breweries were in beautiful old buildings, frequently right in the middle of town, with beer halls and beer gardens abounding. They weren't buried someplace out of town, but were central to their communities. They were gathering places. They were woven into the fabric of daily life. As for styles, they were endless, and they all had a great sense of history behind them: stouts, porters, bitters, sours, lambics, pilsners, hefeweizens, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I was like a kid in a candy store. And to think, little did I know it, but I was doing very, very serious career research at the time. This was the genesis of my first why. Why did I want to open a brewery? My partners and I wanted to bring the great beer styles and rich beer culture that we had experienced in Europe to America. We believed we could change beer from being a commodity into being something distinctive, local, interesting, and fun. In addition, we had visions of brewers and breweries resuming their place within the community, of bringing people together and being a catalyst for local organizations. This was the foundation of what would eventually become the Harpoon Helps program that I will discuss later. So there we were with a love of beer, an idea to bring better beer to Boston, but how did we know if the American beer drinkers were ready for it or even want it? Fortunately, we saw that things were already starting to change in other industries. By the mid-1980s, there were stirrings of consumers wanting more choice. In coffee, a new company called Starbucks was spreading eastward. If you could believe it, they expected people to pay $2 for a cup of coffee. In Boston, a local roaster named Coffee Connection was doing the same thing, and consumers were enthusiastic about the new choices. The ice cream market was seeing the same development, with small upstarts like Ben & Jerry's taking on the established mass market brands. Could the same be true for beer? One key indicator for us was the growth in imported beers. Between 1972 and 1985, imported beer sales had grown from approximately 1 million barrels to just under 10 million barrels, or from less than 1% of the market to close to 5%. Explosive growth by any measure. This made clear to us that American consumers were looking for more choice, and we could certainly beat the imports at providing fresh, local beer for New England. So with business plan in hand, we set out to raise money and successfully did so from 35 individuals to the tune of $430,000. In June of 1986, we incorporated Mass Bay Brewing Company, and early the next year, we moved into a 5,200 square feet of space that had been vacated by the U.S. Navy on what was then known as the South Boston waterfront. We installed our brewing tanks, kegging equipment, and bottling line, and shortly thereafter, Harpoon Ale was born, and we became the first packaging brewery to open in Massachusetts since Carling closed its Natick brewery in 1971. Of course, we'd like to tell people, as Mike said, that we had a clear vision of what the South Boston waterfront would become, but that would not be entirely true. We did, however, want our brewery to be located in a space where we could welcome our customers for festivals, tastings, and tours. I'll tell a short story on one small way that we reinforce a good lesson from our early days. In our first few years, we certainly struggled like many small businesses. We had no heat or air conditioning in our offices. In the winter, we would hold sales meetings in a bathroom that had a baseboard heater. Our lawyer liked us and let us use one of their conference rooms for quarterly meetings. He knew we were tight on money and let us know that we could help ourselves to office supplies after he left the room at the end of our meetings. Well, we did, and an enduring habit developed. To this day, we have never bought pens at Harpoon. No, we no longer take them from our lawyer's office. Our people quickly learn how many hotels, conferences, and businesses give away pens for free. Check your tables. I've been eyeing those since I got here. And they always take a few to bring back to the office. It has become customary for people to return from conferences and dump a half dozen pens on our CFO's desk. In response, he has established the monthly Finance IPA, which stands for Increased Profits Award, which goes to an employee who has come up with a great way to save the company money. Each month, the winner gets a pen, provided for free by somebody, and I expect next month's award will be award something from the Newton Marriott. I can promise you that. We've had a long history of firsts in our market. First seasonal beer with Harpoon Winter Warmer in 1988, first Oktoberfest beer in '89, first Oktoberfest Festival in 1990, first wheat beer with Harpoon UFO Hefeweizen. This continued with the introduction of Harpoon IPA as our summer seasonal 25 years ago in 1993. It was the first craft IPA sold on the East Coast, and the response was overwhelming. Brewing IPA in those days presented us with some challenges. You see, we couldn't even purchase the ingredients that we needed to make IPA the way that we wanted to do so back in the early 1990s. We couldn't get the roasted malt that we needed. So our head brewer came up with a solution. He asked every employee to take home a 50-pound bag of pale malt and roast it on a cookie tin in their oven at home. This worked for a while, but it couldn't keep up with demand. The next solution was to ask our friends and neighbors at Pete's Dockside if we could use their pizza ovens after they closed for the day. That got us through the rest of the summer, and by the next year, when we changed Harpoon IPA to a year-round beer, we were able to purchase the caramel malts that we needed. None of these early accomplishments would have been possible without the all-hands-on-deck spirit of my fellow employees, as well as from an extended community of friends, family, and neighbors. We focused on culture before we had ever heard the word applied to business. We based our values on honesty, hard work, and treating our fellow employees as we wanted to be treated. Nothing radical in any of that. What has struck me, though, over my now lengthy career is how important it is to both set the right tone early and to constantly reinforce it as you grow and the years pass. The establishment of Harpoon Helps was one step that we took to underpin our culture by formalizing our role in the community, or as we called it, being a good neighbor. Through Harpoon Helps, we have supported hundreds of local charities that were meaningful to Harpooners and thereby further strengthened our culture. Harpoon's culture is reflective of the Foundation's mission in its simplest form. We all need to do our part to take care of one another. In partnering with the Foundation for MetroWest, individuals and businesses can and do positively impact the lives of people that live here in a way that's meaningful and long-lasting. It's an ideal that I fully embrace, and in fact, the story of the first Harpoon 5-miler helps illustrate this point. In the first year we held the race back in 2002, we realized that we were going to have more runners than we could handle. So we put out a call through our customer loyalty program called the Friends of Harpoon, asking if anybody would be interested in volunteering to help out for the race, which was supporting a very important and personal cause for the brewery, ALS research. The response was tremendous, with hundreds of Harpoon beer fans wanting to help out, support a great cause, and maybe have a beer or two afterwards. This enthusiastic response got us thinking. Maybe there was a way we could harness this desire to volunteer and drink beer to create more opportunities to do good within our community. So the following year, the first Harpoon Helps Volunteer mission took place at the Greater Boston Food Bank with more than 200 volunteer Friends of Harpoon sorting food. From there, it has been off to the races with millions of dollars raised, thousands of volunteer hours, and countless charities supported. As I said earlier, knowing my why has always been very important to me, and never was that more clear than in early 2014. My initial reason for wanting to co-found a brewery was to change the U.S. beer market, just a very small dream there. But by 2013, I realized that it shifted. We had exceeded our goal to change the industry, as the U.S., by that point, had become the most exciting place in the world to be a beer drinker. After 28 years in business together, my partner decided he wanted a change and a liquidity event. He wanted either to sell to a strategic buyer or to bring in a private equity firm and then in a few years go public or sell to a strategic buyer. He put a great deal of pressure on me to agree to this strategy. So again, I had to answer the question, why was I in business? What was the story of my career? Was it just to sell the company to the highest bidder and deposit a large check? Did my responsibilities end there? You know, I was raised by some pretty amazing people. Not just my parents, but plenty of teachers, neighbors, and friends showed me how to live a fulfilling life by their examples. I have been further blessed to have worked with some amazing people in my career who have reinforced these values. One such person was the late Bill O'Brien, CEO of Hanover Insurance in Worcester, and my father's closest friend. Bill encapsulated and articulated many of these values. He defined values as that part of human nature that an individual believes to be important and right. Bill also believed that a career is an opportunity to find a purposeful and significant life and to contribute to the well-being of others. With people like Bill and my parents as mentors, I try to always remember that if those at the top of an organization do not cultivate character and virtue, then no one will, and no set of rules or corporate culture will ever compensate. So back to March 7th, 2014. My partner and I could not agree on the future of the business. The times were pretty crazy in craft beer, with sky-high valuations and deals being announced almost weekly. As we each owned just under 45% of the company, neither of us could easily force the other's hand. I suggested that we convene a meeting with our other 6 shareholders, 2 outside directors and 4 senior managers, and treat them like a jury. We would each present our vision for the future of the brewery and ask them to render a verdict. My proposal was that instead of selling the company, we borrow money, set up an employee stock ownership plan, and give my partner's shares to our employees. So that Friday morning, we met with them and made our cases. It was a very emotional day at Harpoon. We had been partners for 28 years. In addition, the people on that jury were put in a very challenging position. They had all known the 2 of us for decades, and 2 of the senior managers reported to my partner and 2 reported to me. In addition, everyone in that group stood to make a good deal of money pretty quickly if they supported my partner's position. After 2 hours of deliberations, the vote came back 6-0 to support moving to employee ownership. The leadership team answered why in a manner consistent with our values. The team answered that way because we had collectively built a culture based on the values that led to that decision, from the brew house all the way to the board of directors. You see, we believe that we're in business not just to maximize our payout. We believe that we're in business to make great beer, bring people together, create long-term value, and provide an environment for everyone at Harpoon to work hard and share in the financial success of the company. So my why had changed, but the values had not. The dream became a reality, not just for my partner and our investors, but now our 200 employees are full participants. Later that same year, in July, we gathered together as a company in our beer hall in Boston. We had told our employees that the agenda was to discuss the first half of the year and make plans for the second half. We had kept the transaction quiet, but I'm sure some people noticed unusual activity around our offices during the preceding months. I invited some of the individuals who had helped us with the deal, who are in this room, banker and lawyer types, to join us for the announcement. They became strangers in suits along the wall, and they certainly made people realize that something big might be up. For a Harpoon crowd with open taps just feet away, it was an unusually quiet and anxious gathering. I started by telling them that I was sure they were all aware of the transactions that had been going on in the industry, and they might have noticed that Rich and I had a bunch of gray hair, so there might be some changes coming. I then told them that I indeed was there to announce the sale of the company, and that I wanted to introduce them to the new owners of a large minority stake in the brewery. You could have heard a pin drop at this point. Finally, I asked them to turn to the people seated next to them and shake their hands because they were now all the owners of 48% of Harpoon. It was a great moment. There were shouts and cheers and not a few tears. It was an amazing night and one I will never forget. The years since have been wonderfully challenging as we work hard to develop a fully engaged employee ownership culture and prove that employee ownership can work. We expanded our family in October of last year when we acquired another small Massachusetts brewer, Clown Shoes. The owner of Clown Shoes was specifically attracted to us as a buyer for his firm because of the way we ran our business and our employee ownership. I am proud of the stand that we have taken, especially at this time in our country's economic history. Studies publicized by the National Center for Employee Ownership consistently show improvements in revenue growth, employment growth, and annual growth in sales per employee for employee-owned companies, in addition to the significant increase in personal net worth for employees of ESOP firms. Now, with my 30-plus years in business, graying hair and control of this microphone, I'm going to share a few musings from a radical centrist. I'll focus on business and the economy because that's what I do for a living, and I care deeply about opportunity, equality, and the benefits of hard work. As put so well by Michael Gove, UK Environmental Secretary, capitalism, free markets, free enterprise, the freedom to invest, buy, sell, organize, innovate, choose, and decide has been the single most liberating force in our history. It has raised billions out of poverty, brought food, water, heat and shelter, entertainment and enlightenment, the space to appreciate beauty and the time to cultivate relationships to people and nations with hitherto struggled simply to survive. But what is it best known for, especially by younger people today? As Mr. Gove continues, it's unfortunately too well known for bosses who earn a fortune but don't look after their staff, international companies that treat tax laws as an optional extra, private equity firms who take out massive dividends while knowing that the company's pension is about to go bust, and corrupt crony capitalism where the favored few protect their advantages via lobbying or backroom deals. According to the Economic Policy Institute, over the past 40 years, typical worker compensation has increased by 11% in real terms, while CEO compensation has increased by 1,070%. As Michael Tomasky wrote in the New York Times this summer with some friendly advice for capitalists, if you want fewer socialists, easy, stop creating them. My father used to say that the biggest threat to our free enterprise system is not going to come from Washington or Beacon Hill, but from too much greed on the part of those in the system. Without restraint, capitalism does not work well in a democratic society. 40 years ago, CEOs took home 20 to 30 times as much as the average worker. Today, that figure is over 200. Why is it okay to criticize idleness and laziness, but not greed? Why did shareholder return become the only measurement of a success in business? What about a stakeholder capitalism founded on doing what's best for customers, employees, and communities, as well as owners? It's important to remember that if capitalism's friends don't show restraint and reform the system, then capitalism's enemies will do it for us, and everyone will end up worse off. We can each take a stand for less greed, more fairness, and more opportunity for everyone to share in the benefits of our great system. We can make it work for everyone. Over the last couple of years, the craft beer industry has changed fast and furiously. When we started brewing in 1986, there were a handful of breweries, just over 100 across the United States. Today, there are more than 7,000 and heading higher. We face headwinds that we could not have imagined would exist even 4 years ago. It's an absolute dogfight out there for shelf space, draft lines, share of voice, you name it. I see my fellow employee owners at the brewery, in the trade, and in the office. They're working tremendously hard for something we all believe in. So although my why has evolved throughout the years, it has always come to me fairly easily, perhaps even more so during the challenging times. I feel a great sense of pride in what we're building at Harpoon and a great warmth from the collective efforts of my fellow employee owners. We have put our stake in the ground together. It began on that day in March of 2014, and we're only getting started. I'm more excited now than I have ever been. Why? Because I love beer, love life. Cheers to independent craft brewing. Thank you very much.